You know, there's a part of the Oscars that nobody really talks about. It's not just the movies competing, it's the studios behind them. Every year, studios like A24, Netflix, Warner Brothers, and the rest of the usual suspects roll out their biggest players, each trying to convince the Academy that their film is the one that deserves to be a highlight in cinematic history. And depending on how these campaigns play out, the entire Best Picture race can shift overnight. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the garage. Gerald here with you. Each award season, the Oscar race quietly transforms into something closer to political theater. A handful of powerful studios emerge as the usual contenders, each armed with a small army of publicists, strategists, and party planners. It may be worrisome or downright infuriating to some movie lovers that these studios campaign for their chosen films the way lawmakers argue about the next tax break or healthcare package. But that's the reality of Oscar season today. It's not just about which films move us, but which films are moved into position. Still, that tug-of-war between art and ambition has defined the modern Academy era. And each year, these studios bring at least their top two heavy hitters to the fight, hoping their prestigious title becomes the one to stand above the rest. Tonight, we'll break down who's positioned best with these studios and who is lurking in the shadows, waiting to steal a nomination or two when the ballots drop. All right, so the basic breakdown of this video is I'm going to tell you the 10 major studios that I think have definite players in the mix for Best Picture. I'm not really going beyond Best Picture on this conversation. And then at the end, there's going to be a few wild card or dark horse studios that also have a possible candidate, although it would be a long shot. Let's go through this line by line, studio by studio, and then we'll see what we're working with overall, because the goal of this video is to show you essentially 25 players from various studios, and each studio typically will get no more than 2 nominees in for Best Picture, and that's at a maximum. Some may get 1, some may get 0. So we will start at the top. 17 nominations since 2010 for Searchlight Studios. The most notable, they have 3 wins in that category since 2010. They would be for Nomadland, which was under the Searchlight umbrella before getting bought out by Disney, so that would count. The Shape of Water from, of course, Guillermo del Toro, who's in the conversation this year for another studio, and Birdman also won Best Picture for Searchlight. I'm going to give you the 2 movies for that studio that I think they are going to be campaigning the hardest this award season, which is really underway. So if we think any Searchlight movies are going to be in the Best Picture 10 this year, I think it would be The Testament of Ann Lee or Is This Thing On? Or both. The Testament of Ann Lee is an interesting one. That's one that's directed by Mona Fastvold, and Brady Corbet was part of the writing team on that film. So they basically switched roles from what went down in The Brutalist last year, where Corbet was the director and Mona Fastvold was helping in the writing of the film, which was for A24, and we know how well that did, receiving multiple nominations and receiving a couple pretty prestigious wins also, including lead actor for Adrian Brody, who was pretty much in the lead all season last year. Ann Lee premiered on the festival circuit and did not gain a distributor right away, which gave a lot of us, myself included, pause about that film's chances for Best Picture. But it did ultimately, about a month later, receive a distributor, which of course is Searchlight, who not only did they get a distributor, they got the #1 distributor in terms of getting movies nominated for Best Picture. And the other one for Searchlight is a movie called Is This Thing On?, which is directed by Bradley Cooper, and it's a bit of a dramedy following Will Arnett's character, who is a stand-up comic, and he's doing stand-up comedy as a way to deal with his impending divorce from his wife, who is played by Laura Dern in the film. Being directed by Cooper brings a bit of prestige and notoriety to the film automatically, as he is largely celebrated across the Academy. He is one of the most nominated people in the history of the Academy Awards. Warner Brothers Studios has got some money-making films on their hands right now. I had to pick 2 for this project. To start out, I'll go with One Battle After Another, as that was my #2 on my last round of Power Rankings predictions for Best Picture, and I also think it's in the mix for a ton of categories. At my last check, I think I had it being nominated for 8 Academy Awards, and for winning a couple pretty notable ones, including Best Director, which is long overdue for Paul Thomas Anderson. That's going to be a heavy narrative going forward this award season for PTA and for One Battle After Another. It is a topical, timely, somewhat political narrative, even though I don't think PTA tells the story with any kind of like political agenda, but it's definitely built into the narrative of the film and to the screenplay. Kind of their second push behind One Battle After Another, and that's going to be Sinners from director Ryan Coogler. This was an early release, and everybody on the punditry circuit and in the awards space immediately, and myself included, started throwing Sinners into the conversation for Best Picture because it came out early in the year and there just wasn't a lot of action from a prestige space in 2025. We just hadn't seen anything really since the Oscars ceremony, which celebrated the year in film for 2024. I also think that along with One Battle After Another, Warner Brothers has got the history there with the Academy, of course, Argo being the only winner, the Ben Affleck film. So they are due to get another W sooner than later. Focus Features tends to show up quite a bit, as you can see, with 11 films nominated for Best Picture since 2010. None of them winning yet. And this is, as of right now, which I'm recording on October 16th, has their first Best Picture Oscar this year, I think, with Hamnet, which is the Chloe Zhao film, the period piece that takes place during the Shakespeare era that stars Jessie Buckley and Paul Mescal. A lot of people have seen it, most of whom attended the various festivals. I have not had a chance to see it yet, but I cannot wait. This one also has tremendous reception and reviews, whether you're talking about Letterboxd or Metacritic. Anywhere you can read reviews from folks that attended the festival, absolutely loved it. And they said it was devastating. It was a very emotional watch, and it moves audiences. Now, I'm not saying the other films that I've mentioned prior to this didn't do that in some facet or another, but this is the first film that I can think off the tip of my tongue among the awards players that is really moving people consensusly and making them feel something other than I'm just watching a movie and this is entertaining. The other movie that I think they'll be pushing this season is Begonia. Obviously, they have a great relationship with Yorgos and they want to see him succeed, and they're going to be behind him. The campaign is going to be heavy, a lot of money, a lot of dollars being thrown at it. It's probably more of a tech player and possibly performances for Emma Stone or Jesse Plemons, but I don't know if I'm sold 100% on the Best Picture part of it. Definitely not sold on the Best Picture win part of it when you have films like One Battle, Sinners, and, of course, Hamnet, which is from the same studio. Netflix, 10 Best Picture nominated films since 2010, no wins, and Netflix may have bitten off a little more than they can chew this year because they are probably, with the exception of maybe Neon, which I'll talk about here in a second, they're probably the one studio that it was really hard for me to pick two titles because I don't really know. There's like 4 titles that are in the mix, and honestly, Netflix might not even have a Best Picture nominee this year because of the scattered reception for some of these films. However, if they do, here are the 2 that I think they will be putting the most effort behind. First up would be Jay Kelly. A lot of you might raise your eyebrow here, but Netflix, not only with the 10 nominations in general, but they also have a chokehold on getting the Best Picture villain into the final 10. Usually there's a film nominated that consensusly around at least the critical community do not think deserves an Oscar nomination, or in some cases, it's just a bad movie. They've done it 3 times in recent memory, at least based on the data that I'm collecting for this video. That would be, of course, Emilia Perez last year. Also, films like Don't Look Up and Maestro were also considered villains in their year in the critical space because a lot of people thought there were other movies that were not only better, but were more well-received and more prestigious that could have gotten that Best Picture nomination and possible road to victory. So Jay Kelly could take that mantle as a Best Picture nominee for Netflix, but also as the villain this year. The reason I think it's the one that Netflix is really going to push, and I want to say if they're smart, is because of the narrative in Jay Kelly. This is a movie about actors. It's a movie about movies. And the Academy and Hollywood love movies about themselves. And they're going to think this movie is for them. And they're going to feel a connection to that material. The other one will be Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. I do think del Toro has the prestige in his name. And he's becoming a director that a pattern has been developing over the last decade to where if he's making a prestigious project of some kind that's out in the cinema, he is getting mentioned at the Academy Awards. Even with the animated film a few years ago, not only did it get nominated, it won Best Animated Feature. And a lot of that, it was a great film, but a lot of that also probably had to do when it comes to voting because his name, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. And this is Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. 20th Century also has not won a Best Picture Oscar since 2010. And this year, their two biggest players will start out with Avatar, Fire and Ash, which I did have in my most recent projected 10. Not a lot I have to say about this one. This is James Cameron, and it's the Avatar franchise. So it's showing up. It's shown up. The pattern is there that it's going to be nominated, even if, consensusly as the public or the critics in the space don't agree with it. It tends to show up, and I do not bet against JC. Now, it could miss because if it does make it, and if some of these other films I've mentioned from various studios make it, a la One Battle After Another, Sinners, we're going to be talking about another one here in a second, that's a lot of box office success or borderline blockbuster, or in some case blockbusters. We know Avatar is going to be a blockbuster to make it into Best Picture. Usually there's one, maybe two of those, but there's never like four of them. So again, these are trends that can be broken. They're not concrete. It's not like there's a cap on how many indies or internationals or blockbusters or comedies or whatever can make it in, but traditionally speaking, it does not happen. The other one that I think 20th Century will probably get behind is Deliver Me From Nowhere, which is the Bruce Springsteen biopic starring Jeremy Allen White as well as Jeremy Strong. I think the performances are going to push this movie up when it comes to possible Best Picture nomination. Music biopics, the Academy loves them. And us that follow the Oscars religiously, we tell ourselves every time there's a music biopic in the mix, oh, that was okay, but the Academy's not going to go for that. That was fine, but I mean, that's not an Oscar winner. That's not an Oscar nominee, and it always is. A24 has received 8 Best Picture nominations, and they've got 2 wins already. Their winners were Moonlight in a very dramatic year and a dramatic fashion on stage, if you guys remember that debacle with La La Land. But Moonlight, a very inspired win. And then a few years ago, of course, Everything Everywhere All at Once, also winning Best Picture. Their one and I think only player is Marty Supreme, which is directed by Josh Safdie, starring Timothée Chalamet, who I also have as a frontrunner in lead actor, which is going to help Marty Supreme overall. I also think it's a player in multiple categories, so anytime you have a film that's receiving 5, 6, 7 or more nominations, Best Picture usually kind of falls into that category because it's getting nominated for all this other stuff that went into making the movie. So it doesn't always happen, but if you got 4 or 5 plus nominations, you're usually in the Best Picture discussion. The other one that I listed as number 2 that I frankly do not think is going to happen is The Smashing Machine, which is ironically the other Safdie brother, Benny Safdie, and that's the one starring The Rock. It's a biopic based on Mark Kerr, the UFC legend. A24 also has If I Had Legs, I Would Kick You, which premiered early in the year at Sundance, and that's got some feedback behind it too. So I don't really know which one of those would be the number 2, but at the end of the day, I don't think they have a player in Best Picture except for Marty Supreme, and I do think The Smashing Machine is probably what they're going to put their secondary efforts into. The next most Best Picture nominated studio in the last 15 years is Paramount Pictures, which I was actually kind of surprised to find out. No wins though, and that's probably the biggest studio without a win. They don't have any players for Best Picture this year. I don't think this is the year they get their win. Honestly, I don't think they even get a nominee. But the 2 films that would stand the biggest chance or the most likely chance to end up in the final 10, but they would be Roofman from Derek Cianfrance, which actually just came out this weekend to great reviews. We just found out that Paramount's going to be campaigning Channing Tatum in the lead role, which is big news for the film. I listed it as a dark horse when I did my dark horse video about a month ago, but if I'm being truthful, I just don't think there's enough room to squeak it in there. It would be a last-second Hail Mary that would probably shock all of us. The other one is, of course, Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning. With nominations like Top Gun Maverick, this seems possible, and it's the last film in a very beloved, illustrious franchise that I think this is the 8th film, spanned over 20 years in telling these stories, and Tom Cruise's dedication to cinema, what he did to himself in these movies, the stunts, the action, everything is crazy. So I could see why they would want to do it. It just came out early in the summer, right? Like in May, and it just kind of fizzled out, and the reviews were kind of mid on it. It was lackluster in terms of reception. You know, the nomination here would be more of a, let's nominate Mission Impossible. Let's nominate Tom Cruise. It'd basically be what this would be. I don't think it's going to happen, but Paramount's got a shot here. And if they campaign it well enough and do enough parties and screeners and all that kind of stuff, and Tom Cruise is out there, I mean, who knows? It's Tom Cruise. Sony Pictures Classics, which I'm not doing it on this video, but they are a studio that is very good at getting performances nominated. I might do that video as well if I have time to research and put it all together, but we're just talking about Best Picture today. They've received 6 films to get a Best Picture nomination since 2010, and no wins for them either. I do think theirs is coming soon, although I don't think it's this year. The only films that I think they could push as their top 2 with a straight face to get into Best Picture would be Blue Moon, which is the Richard Linklater biopic about Lorenz Hart, the Rodgers and Hart duo that wrote a lot of very famous musical numbers leading up to the opening of Oklahoma in 1943. And the other one would be, their number 2 would be Nuremberg, which is kind of coming up late in terms of the chatter. I didn't even know what this movie was until like a month ago. I just found out about it in like September. And I was like, wait a second, this does sound Oscar-y. And then I watched the trailer. Russell Crowe has the makeup and transformation. Rami Malek, who we discussed earlier, is a previous Oscar winner. So I saw that trailer, and then I read a little bit about Nuremberg as a project being a wartime film based on real events. And I'm like, oh shit, are we doing this? So it is possible. So I think Blue Moon could get the biggest push from SPC for Ethan Hawke, Andrew Scott, and for possibly screenplay, Linklater, some other stuff in that film. Costuming is brilliant in that film, cinematography. And then I think Nuremberg might be a push for picture because it's Academy fare. If you put Nuremberg in front of them, they will literally eat that like they were in Castaway with Tom Hanks for the last year. I mean, they're going to eat this thing up. And then 2 more studios I want to touch on in this video. Universal Studios. So they have 2 winners. The 2 winners were Green Book, talk about Oscar villains, and Oppenheimer. By the way, I think Green Book's an okay movie. Do I think it's a Best Picture of the Year in the history books of movie history? No, I don't. But it's not a horrible movie. It's just not really a good Best Picture winner. And then Oppenheimer from Christopher Nolan was the no-brainer of the century in terms of what it was going to win in its year. So obviously me and probably everybody else on earth agree with that victory for Nolan. This year, I'm only listing 1 for Universal Studios, which is crazy. I could not come up with a second movie. I think they're going to put all their chips in, and they're going to get this film not only nominated, but really, really close to if not winning Best Picture, to winning a lot of other prestigious categories that it missed out on last year. And that's Wicked for Good. So I currently have it being nominated for 11 Academy Awards in my own power rankings. I'll be doing that update officially the first week in November here on the channel, so make sure you subscribe for that. But I think Wicked for Good is going to be a big player and is going to end up getting more nominations than it received last year, which was 10. I also think it could finish like 2nd or 3rd in the voting for Best Picture. I can't even put anything else on this video because they didn't bother themselves with pushing any other kind of a film as an Academy player. It's just Wicked for Good for them. So think about that. Every other studio on my video today has at least 2, in some cases 3, maybe even 4 or 5 if you're Netflix or Warner Brothers. And Neon we're going to talk about in a second too. But Universal only has 1 horse in the race to worry about. And they're going to push that like there's no tomorrow. And on top of that, it's going to be well received. I think it's going to be a brilliant film. And I'm really pulling for it in any category it shows up in. It's going to be tightly contested for original song because we know there's going to be 2 new songs. We know production design and costumes are going to be in the mix again because they won last year. Cinematography is probably in the mix. Adapted screenplay might be in the mix. You could possibly see nominations that they didn't get last year show up, which would be like director for John M. Chu, or even supporting actor for Jonathan Bailey, who did get some mentions during award season but did not show up from the Academy. Look out for Wicked for Good. I couldn't even put a number 2 for Universal. If you know one that you think Universal might be pushing besides Wicked for Good, let me know down in the comments. And then the last studio I'll mention in my major players here this year is going to be Neon Studios. And they've got 4 Best Picture nominees since 2010. two winners, and the two winners would be in my probably top 10 movies since 2010. So they really did their thing, but it's Parasite, of course, and last year's winner, Anora. Neon Studios really has 4 films that are all pretty even ground right now. I'll just put it that way. They're all getting great buzz and great reception on the festival circuit. So I picked the 2 that I think are going to have the biggest push as we go through the rest of the year from them. Number 1 would be Sentimental Value. That's in most people's top 5 right now for Best Picture. It was my number 1 for about a month or a month and a half coming out of the Cannes Film Festival. The supporting players are getting a ton of praise and attention paid to them too, which would consist of like Elle Fanning and Stellan Skarsgård, who might be the front runner in his category of supporting actor. You've also got the international piece here, which is interesting with Neon Studios. I told you they have 4. All 4 of them are international films. And not only that, they're not in the English language, or at least not mostly in the English language. The second one, by the way, I think is going to be It Was Just an Accident, which is another one that I think is going to show up in the 10 for Best Picture. That is a film from Jafar Panahi, so the narrative is going to come along with it being a great movie of his kind of cinematic journey and, kind of battling against the Iranian government and being an outcast because of the types of films that he's making and the stories that he wants to tell, and opening various other people like America and whoever else sees these movies' eyes to these different issues that these countries deal with. And I think the Academy is going to stand up for this thing big time. So look out for It Was Just an Accident. That's, I think, the second big push for Neon this year. And then some studios I didn't mention that you might be curious about that have shown up in recent years and gotten quite a few films nominated for Best Picture. The first one would be Lionsgate, and the movie that I think they could push this season would be a movie called Twinless. It also premiered early on at Sundance, and it received rave reviews from everything, really. The writing, so you could get into original screenplay here. And then the dual role performance from Dylan O'Brien also. He plays a set of twins in the movie, and they're completely different. One is a gay man, and one is a very masculine, not gay man. Apple Studios, or Apple Original Films, I think they're called, of course, got another, what for some reason is considered an Oscar villain, although I think it's a pretty good movie, Coda, not only nominated, but to win Best Picture, kind of like coming up, drafting from the rear to take that award a few years ago. This year, I don't know if they have a definite Best Picture nominee, but they could get behind F1, the movie starring Brad Pitt, who of course is a prestigious legend in Hollywood himself, even among the Academy, now that he has gold on his mantle also. But this would be a route they would take that would be very, very similar to Top Gun Maverick. It's the same director, actually, Joseph Kosinski. I do not think After the Hunt is getting in for Best Picture, but I wanted to mention Amazon MGM because they've also gotten a handful of films nominated since 2010, especially since that merger with Amazon. And After the Hunt has Luca Guadagnino, and then you've got Julia Roberts. I mean, she could still show up an actress, although I dropped her out of my predictions after the kind of mediocre reviews for the film. But the film's still in the conversation. It comes out this weekend, actually, as I'm recording, nationwide. And it's still being discussed. A lot of people like it. They just don't see it as an Oscar player, but that's not up for us or the GA to decide. That's really up to the Academy to decide. So if it's pushed by MGM and it gets out there to them, and ends up making long lists and down the line, then who knows? I do think it will be a movie that they push because they don't have any other candidates really, except for maybe Hedda, starring Tessa Thompson, which could be an acting play for Tessa, costumes, that kind of stuff. And the last one I'm going to mention is Mubi. Now, Mubi's got a couple films this year. Father, Mother, Sister, Brother ended up winning the top prize, I think, at the Venice Film Festival, which I haven't seen it, but was largely WTF from everybody that went to the festival. So I didn't put that as their number 1 push. What I did is I put Die My Love from Lynn Ramsey as their number 1 push. And I actually could see this being the movie on this video that I'm talking about that nobody's really counting on getting in there that could show up. I'm not predicting it. If you watch my predictions video, you won't see it in my 10, but it could be one of those movies on Oscars nomination morning where when they say it, everybody's ecstatic and can't believe it, but nobody predicted it. So the reason I say that is because Mubi got The Substance nominated for not only Best Picture, but for Director, for Screenplay, for multiple categories, and it is an Oscar-winning film because it won Hair and Makeup that year. Demi Moore, for Lead Actress, received a nomination. I mean, this was unprecedented for the Academy. Even in years past when horror showed up at the Academy, especially in top-of-the-line categories, it was like thrillers or psychological dramas like, Silence of the Lambs, Get Out, etc. But never a gory, kind of disgusting, depending on who you are, body horror film with nudity and just gross imagery. I loved it, as you could probably tell, but it did not speak to me as an Academy movie. In fact, I would have never even thought of it as being even remotely possible. So I believe in them as a young studio, believing in these filmmakers and these smaller projects, these unorthodox projects, and getting them the praise that they most likely deserve. I'm going to show you a couple slides. So here are the 23 movies I mentioned as possibles based on the studio research I did. Of these 23 films that you're looking at on the screen here with their respective studios, I think whatever 10 movies that we are going to get as our Best Picture nominees this year are going to come from what you see on this slide right here. If there is a movie nominated for Best Picture that is not on this slide, while it is possible, I would be thoroughly surprised. The next slide is going to be the 10 left standing. Here you go. I want to point out something about this slide that might kind of raise your eyebrow a little bit. So, as of right this minute, which is October 16th, I do think that Searchlight will have a player in the Best Picture 10, and I am banking on it being Bradley Cooper's Is This Thing On? Which is basically what I feel like I need to say right now. Is this thing on? Can you guys hear me? Yes, I am saying that is getting nominated for Best Picture this year based on the criteria and the fact that Searchlight is really, really good at this. And I don't think they're going to go absentee this year and not have somebody in the 10. With that being said, Frankenstein from Guillermo del Toro is suffering, and I'm taking it out of the 10. I'm leaving Jay Kelly as Netflix's representation based on the narrative in that film, like I discussed, and the fact that Hollywood loves kissing its own ass. So I could be wrong, but I think it's going to be the Best Picture villain this year and Netflix's lone representation in the Best Picture 10. Here is what we would be looking at. Warner Brothers, of course, with Sinners and One Battle After Another. Neon with Sentimental Value, and It Was Just an Accident. Those two studios would be the only ones with multiple nominees at 2. Everybody else would get 1. Of those studios, you're looking at Netflix, Searchlight, A24, Universal, 20th Century, and Focus. Those would be the other studios represented in the Best Picture 10 this year. All right, let me get back to Past Me to wrap up this GD video. I want to know what you guys think, and I peruse your comments all the time. I try to respond to as many of them as I can, even if it's just a thumbs up or a heart. So let me know down below in the comments what studios were not represented on this video. First of all, is there something I missed? And also, what's the #1 play for some of these studios if I'm off there? Because Neon, Netflix especially, got me a little like, maybe, I don't know, so I don't know which way to really go yet, where the tides are kind of turning. And this is all just a hunch right now in mid-October. But with the festivals wrapping up, I kind of feel it's at least kind of starting to come into focus a little bit more. Let me know what you guys think. What studio is going to walk away with the Best Picture Oscar this year? Because if I'm calling it right this second, I'm saying Focus Features is going to get their first one with Hamnet. I really appreciate you tuning into this project and letting me kind of brainstorm out loud. You guys are the best. Make sure you subscribe, and I will see you out here next time in the garage.